Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Danny Dhaiphong. You are tuning in to the Left Lens. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Sorry about that. So yeah, you're tuning into the Left Lens. How are you all doing this afternoon? It is a Saturday afternoon. Sorry about yesterday. I had to postpone. There was a bit of a change in plans, but I am here now, and we are going to have a great program today. It's just going to be about an hour of me on YouTube, and then I'm hoping actually to shift the Q&A to CALLIN, depending on how things go here, how many viewers are here. It would be great to to get you all to call in. We can have a more, I would say, engaging conversation that way. And I do have some call-in episodes to make up, given that I was out for a week. But hello, EMR. Hello, hello, hello. Thanks for coming this afternoon. So while you're here, please do like this stream. Please do hit that notifications bell, subscribe to the channel. It's a very hot one today. So I'll probably be on for an hour. I wanted to get in a little earlier. So hello. Hi, Rodrigo. Hello, Rodrigo. How are you? Hello, Gary. Thanks for coming. Make sure that you're liking this stream as you're coming in. Of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to do that. Hit that notifications bell. And I am, I think, 5 subscribers away from my goal for this month of 10 overall. So if you're able to help sustain my journalism, you can do that at patreon.com/Danny Dhaiphong. Hi, Alex. Hello, Terry. Hi, Doozy, if that's how you say your name. Sorry if I butchered it. So good to be with all of you today. So keep liking that stream as you come in. And we can get started. So I hope your Saturday afternoon, early afternoon, or whatever time it is in your time zone is going well. Hope you're having a good start to your weekend. It's going to be a hot one out here in the East Coast of the United States. There's some kind of massive heat wave going on. Temperatures are going to get up in some places to triple digits, 100 degrees, or at least that's what it will feel like. Of course, here where I am in New York, it almost always feels like that if the temperature gets above 85. So it's going to be a hot one today. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to get this in early. I actually haven't been able to secure an air conditioner for this apartment just yet. There's a lot of delays. It's ridiculous. And so only my bedroom has an AC. So it's going to get quite hot in here. So if I start just absolutely looking like I'm drenched and just dripping sweat, you know why. But I hope to have a good conversation, and I hope to have this be a little more engaging than maybe past streams. I know I don't always get to super chats and don't always get to questions, but I'm going to try to today. I only have 2 stories that I want to talk about and analyze. They both have to do with Washington politics, DC establishment. The first we'll go over George W. Bush's gaffe. I think it's just really funny, his Freudian slip. George W. Bush recently slipped up and admitted to war crimes. And then we'll go over Joe Biden's latest polling numbers, which are very bad. And we'll go over some of the reasons why that is, and get a hopefully get a good understanding of the situation right now politically in the United States. It's quite a mess, as I'm sure you all are aware. So hello, Eduardo. How are you? Get a few electric fans. Thanks for the advice. I actually turned my fan off because it actually was creating this kind of like noise in the background, so I got rid of it for the stream at least. So it's but the windows are wide open, and hopefully you can keep this apartment airy. So hello, Terry. If I don't know if I already said hello to you, but hello, Easy D. And hi, Anthony. Hi. Good to see you all here. All right, so make sure you're liking the stream when you come in. And be sure to subscribe, hit the notifications bell. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter and you're seeing this, make sure you go to YouTube, The Left Lens, and go over and drop a like as well. So first things first, let's talk about George W. Bush. So a little bit about me. I was very young during the George W. Bush administration. Let's see, when 9/11 happened, I was 11 years old. Yes, I was 11 years old. 9/11, and I wasn't, of course, at 11. I really wasn't paying attention to politics like that. My dad hated George W. Bush. He hated him. My dad was a Democrat through and through. And the big narrative I remember at the time, though, is one thing I do remember quite starkly, and I don't know if you all do as well, is that George W. Bush actually had a reputation for gaffes. Like, he was kind of known as this gaffe artist. I don't know if you remember that, but there were like entire books, like the liberals, the Democrats, they obsessed over George W. Bush's intellectual capacity. And now that I'm older and I can kind of understand the historical moment a bit better, I understand that to be really a distraction from policy. And now I know a lot more about what happened in that period, especially around these monumental votes for the war in Afghanistan and, of course, the support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. We know that Democrats actually supported those interventions quite strongly, to the point where the only person I can think of, Barbara Lee. I mean, Barbara Lee now has completely soiled her anti-war legacy, but she was the only Democrat at that time, a black Democrat, to vote against the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. But now she's voting for things like the $40 billion Ukraine bill, which we'll get to when we talk about Joe Biden. But nonetheless, I do remember just all of this talk about how dumb George W. Bush is. Bush is dumb. Bush is dumb. And then it led into Obama's campaign, the Barack Obama campaign, where he literally campaigned on, we're going to end these dumb wars. Not we're going to end wars. And a lot of people thought, well, if you're referring to dumb wars, you're probably referring to George W. Bush's wars. And hey, that's good enough. So it was this kind of clever manipulation of anti-war sentiment, where George W. Bush had been painted as this literal jackass, like a dummy, just one big dummy who was so dumb and was just leading the United States into a terrible place because of his lack of intellect, that it distracted from class interests and class policy and ruling class policy and the bipartisan consensus around it. And so what's interesting about this moment, though, 2022, right, middle of May, George W. Bush makes this, or late May, I should say, he makes this gaffe, and we're not having that conversation anymore, right? And I'm going to show you what happened, and then I'm going to react to the aftermath of it, because I think it's very interesting to understand what's going on in politics right now that's different from that moment, right? So I'm just going to pull up the video and play it with all of you. I'll probably have to plug in my headphones so we don't hear an echo. So let me just share the screen and get there. But while you're here, keep liking the stream, keep sharing the stream, keep subscribing to the channel if you have not yet. And then, of course, be sure, if you're able to support my work, I'm about 5 subscribers away at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong for meeting my monthly goal. And I'm getting to my overall goal. I'm less than $150 a month away from my overall goal. It feels good, but it always is this pendulum back and forth, because people leave Patreon, people have to get rid of their subscriptions because of financial reasons, which I totally understand. But I'm looking towards going in that right direction so I can stop asking, because I hate asking. Anyway, so here we go. I'm pulling up the tweet here. Hold on one second. I always do this. Did I share the audio? I'm just going to stop it and do it again, because sometimes I forget to click that little box that says share audio. So, okay. So here we go. Share audio. Yes, it's checked. All right. So let me just plug in my headphones now, because I don't want there to be an echo while you're listening. So yeah, this is George W. Bush. He has his own institute now. Isn't that just lovely? And he's talking about Russia, predictably, right? Because the entire establishment, the foreign policy establishment, the bipartisan consensus on war. The Republicans and Democrats, they're obsessed right now with Russia, obviously. So they can't stop talking about it. And sometimes when you talk so much about one thing, you end up making some mistakes. And George W. Bush makes a really big one here. So have a listen to this.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine.
You heard him. He chuckles afterward. I mean, whatever. Probably a nervous chuckle, but because he literally this dude has literal blood of millions on his hands. To hear him chuckle after that, it's quite creepy. I must say it's quite creepy. But let's continue.
Iraq. Anyway.
So funny. Because it's you. Because you actually did do this, and you're projecting all to Russia.
75.
He's 75, so that's really funny, right? Because we all know the 75-year-olds, they can't get their stories straight. You know, once you're 75, boom, you just automatically admitting to all of your war crimes. So that's Bush, right? So Bush makes this gaffe. All right, let me just unplug these headphones. I don't need it. He makes this gaffe, and I mean, in that video, there's so many examples of just things that the United States did, that he did, his administration. Some people are saying in the chat that George W. Bush rigged the elections. Yes, 2000, Florida. Everybody, if you were alive at that time or if you just studied politics even in a cursory manner, you remember Florida. George W. Bush literally uses family connections to essentially rig the vote in Florida. And then the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. I mean, George W. Bush's family is a huge oligarch. I mean, dating back to Prescott Bush, this guy, Prescott Bush, was a big banker. He bankrolled Nazis, right? I mean, he comes from big oil family. I mean, this is who George W. Bush is. He's a personification of just everything he was talking about. So, hey, why not just blurt out that, yeah, you actually are the war criminal? Not Putin, but George W. Bush. George W. Bush was the one who illegally invaded Iraq, and that led to the destruction of that society. The complete and utter immiseration of Iraqis, the use of depleted uranium. Cancer rates are still incredibly high in Fallujah, right? The decimation of all of civil society, of all of infrastructure, just the cruel, inhumane torture at places like Abu Ghraib. I mean, George Bush is a war criminal. And so it can feel nice to hear him say it, because we've all been thinking it, or at least anyone with a conscience has thought it. But one thing that I found interesting about this was the reaction. Of course, people on the left reacted in a very understandable way, in a way that actually gets to the heart of the matter, that, yeah, Bush, you are the war criminal. Ha ha ha. You made a gaffe, and you actually admitted to the fact that you did do everything you're saying Putin did. But I did find something interesting about the way the liberal establishment reacted to this. I was watching the show Jesus and Mero. I watched that with my wife, and they did a little clip on it. And I think their response is kind of indicative to what has happened politically. It seemed like they were afraid in avoiding the question of war. They made fun of the gaffe, and oh yeah, they even made a little comment about drone strikes. But it was almost as if they were afraid to comment on the significance of what it means for him to admit that he's a war criminal, George W. Bush. And the reason for that is because what have we seen over the last several years, especially over the last 2 years, let's say the latter half of Trump's Trump's administration, we have seen the rehabilitation of George W. Bush. You all remember, I hope you remember, Ellen DeGeneres having him on her show showing off his weird dog paintings or whatever the fuck he does. But this dude literally, he literally has been rehabilitated by the very Democrats who decried him as dumb and dangerous just a decade and a half ago. I mean, this is really criminal. And this has led to what I think is a very interesting political development in Washington, whereby, and it's dangerous in the sense that it gets a little confusing for people, whereby the Democratic Party has become the war party and it's actually absorbed a lot of the neocon GOP elements. We saw this during the Hillary Clinton campaign the second time around in 2016, where she was able to mobilize all of these GOP national security types, right, from the Bush era administration. And that's who sits in the big tent of the Democratic Party now. I mean, and that is who is helping revive this kind of project for a new American century imperialist strategy that the Democratic Party has adopted. So the Democratic Party has become the war party, and George W. Bush has now been able to huddle under the big tent. And part of the reason for this is because what Donald Trump did is his election really ripped the mask off of the United States, ripped the mask off of all the lies and the deceit and the criminality. Now you had a big billionaire who, while he says he's unbought and uncorrupted, we know that Donald Trump was not necessarily uncorrupted or unbought. He did have big donors help him in his campaign, but nonetheless, his persona as this kind of rogue individual really created a response in the establishment that was consolidated, right? It was all about consolidating the war machine so that Trump's unpredictability could be managed, right? Sort of like this managed chaos that was happening in Washington. It's a political strategy that mirrors the overall economic and military strategy of the United States, because that's really what the economic and military strategy of the United States is. It's managed chaos, because the United States doesn't really have anything to offer anyone else around the world. The US military doesn't really have the capacity to ensure any kind of stability wherever it reaches out and lays its tentacles on. So it's all about just managing the chaos. We saw that with Libya. We've seen that with Syria. We've seen that in so many instances of US wars. And politically, that's where the United States is in this crisis of legitimacy. And George W. Bush is a reflection of this, right? His rehabilitation is a reflection of this crisis of legitimacy. So, I mean, it's a problem that we're talking about George W. Bush in this way. I mean, I despise it. It is absolutely abhorrent that the response has been so tepid. We don't get long think pieces. We don't get from the corporate media. We don't get the whole picture, because the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they want to keep George W. Bush as part of this era of American decency, quote unquote, and exceptionalism, quote unquote. It's all about saving face, because the US establishment is preparing for the next Trump. It's preparing for the next political rupture, because the situation in the United States politically is very, very difficult. It's very tense. There are crises everywhere. We're living through an economic crisis. We're living through the end of the US empire, the decline of the US empire. And George W. Bush is out here carrying water for all sides of the establishment so that its objectives are met. That's why you have him out here talking about Russia this, Russia that. The story was a little bit different back in the early 2000s when Russia was cooperative with the war on terror, right? And what did George W. Bush say? I looked him right in the eyes and I saw a good man, something like that. The relations were a little bit more cordial. But of course, by the end of the Bush administration, Russia had taken a different direction, had started to clamp down on its oligarchy, and had begun to assert sovereignty. So that changed the calculus completely. And then under Obama, the policy toward Russia changed. And so now that the Democrats and the Republicans are so in sync, are so in line, they have been able to rehabilitate these ghouls like George W. Bush, these war criminals like George W. Bush, and literally shove them down our throats so much that we get a moment like this. This didn't used to be the case. There used to be a time where these kind of politicians were protected. You didn't get Ronald Reagan being paraded around when he started to have dementia, advanced dementia, right? Where there wasn't that. But best believe if Ronald Reagan was around today, the Democrats would be parading Ronald Reagan around, and we probably get a lot of gaffes because Ronald Reagan has or had, right at that time, toward the end of his life, advanced dementia. Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden is part of this revivalism, and we're going to get into Joe Biden right now. Joe Biden obviously has something going on with him. He obviously isn't the most stable at the moment cognitively. But in order to defeat Bernie Sanders, in order to ensure that the establishment was happy, in order to get someone that represents, kind of like George W. Bush, this bipartisan consensus on war and austerity, the ruling class went all in on Joe Biden, and now we have what we have. We have someone who, right, makes gaffe after gaffe after gaffe and doesn't really have the capacity to do a lot of the things that a president should do, or at least play at. And so actually the situation politically is worsening. And so it's interesting to see how these two stories are combined, right? The war criminality admission by George W. Bush and the current era we are in under President Joe Biden. These two guys are cut from the same cloth. They work for the same donors. Joe Biden voted with George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq. And while I think he's admitted that it was a mistake, really hasn't apologized, nor has he rectified it in foreign policy. So that is the connection there. And so right now, the United States is in this crisis of legitimacy. Okay. The political situation is incredibly fragile. There is just a complete and utter distrust in the government. People are angry. People are dissatisfied. They are not happy with their economic situation. Their concerns are not being addressed across the board. And that is being reflected in poll after poll after poll on Joe Biden's performance. So let's go into Joe Biden's recent Associated Press poll, which shows that a full American more, so up from 2 of 10, a 3 of 10, or a decline, I should say. There's been a decline in approval in terms of the direction that the United States is going. And so it's pretty drastic, okay? So Joe Biden, here's the Associated Press poll, AP NORC. So right now, only 39% of adults approve of Biden's performance as president. Okay, so that's dipping from already negative ratings from a month earlier. Now, this is a really interesting number. Only 2 in 10 adults say the U.S. is heading in the right direction or that the economy is good, which is down from about 3 in 10 a month earlier. And that those drops were concentrated among Democrats, with just 33% of the president's party saying the country is headed in the right direction, down from 49%. Now, that is a massive drop. We're talking about a 16% drop in how Democrats view the direction of their own party. And then above that, only 2 in 10 of all U.S. adults say the U.S. is heading in the right direction. And that's down just from a month ago, 3 in 10. So the situation was already bad, and now it's worse. So these are damning numbers, okay? So, of particular concern for Biden ahead of the midterm elections is his approval among Democrats stands at 73%, a substantial drop since early in his presidency. In AP Norc poll conducted in 2021, Biden's approval rating among Democrats never dropped below 82%. So, again, a 9% drop from 2021. And it seems like it's only going to get worse. So, there you have it. You have declining popularity among Democrats. This is red flag for even the establishment. They should be very worried that Joe Biden does not even have legitimacy within Democratic Party voters, let alone the fact that Democrats can't win with just Democrats alone. That's not how elections really work. You need swing voters, you need independents, you need more than just hardcore, hardline Democrats. But even those hardline Democrats who take these polls, that's who most of these people are, they are saying, well, we don't approve of this job that Joe Biden is doing. Now, one of the biggest problems with the Joe Biden administration is that it continues over and over and over again to claim that things are getting better and that the situation is only being improved by the Joe Biden administration. So recently, actually, and this is really hilarious, Bloomberg has released that U.S. economic growth is going to be larger than China's supposedly this year for the first time since like 1976. Okay. And Joe Biden, this isn't something we brag about. The United States' economic growth has been lower than China since 1976. Do you know how poor China was in 1976? Extremely poor. China didn't really have an industry in 1976, did not have an industrial economy, but yet its economy was growing by far more than the US's even at that time. So this is nothing really to brag about. But the number is funny because they're bragging about a projection of 2.8% growth for the United States and just about 2% for China. And for China, that's a concern. I mean, that's a real concern. COVID has hit them hard. They're restructuring based on that. They've had to slow down because of that. Shanghai situation was difficult and challenging. And now Beijing has had its own kind of outbreak. So when you hit these economic centers in China, like with COVID, and then China's response is pretty heavy-handed, it's going to affect the economy. Do I worry about China's economy like I do the United States? It's not really, because China has already shown during the pandemic that it can bounce back, kind of like it did in 2020 when it only had about a couple of percent growth and then jumped in 2021 to 8%. The United States had no such thing. I think the United States had like negative growth in 2020 and then jumped, to some, I guess, adequate percentage. But the point is that the U.S. economy overall is not in good shape. Ordinary adults know this because they're polling about it. But anyone can look at a graph over the past several years since 1976 and see that a lot of the growth has been pretty stagnant, and that especially since the 2008 crisis, it's been something like 2%. So it's not really amazing that 2.8% is the projected growth. That's pretty stagnant still. But I'll show you just a tweet that Joe Biden tweeted out, right? He shared this a projection from Bloomberg, and he goes, our economy has gone from being one on the mend to being on the move, and now we're outpacing the world. What? You're outpacing the world? Is that true? Because that sounds like an exaggeration to say you're outpacing the world. I don't think the United States is outpacing the world in anything. The United States doesn't even produce anything. What is it outpacing the world in? Bank bailouts, low-wage jobs. I mean, this is an absolute just insult to people who are struggling to pay the bills. Working people are struggling with every single cost right now: housing, medical care, right? We can go down the line of all the things. Gasoline, right? People are struggling with gasoline. Food, there's food shortages, baby formula shortages, all this nonsense that's affecting a wide spectrum of people in the United States. And here he is talking about how the United States is not just on the mend, but it's on the move. And it took weeks just for Joe Biden to enforce the Defense Production Act just to get some baby formula on the shelves again for people who really need it, families who really need it. So this is the kind of thing you get from Joe Biden. I mean, this is why his approval rating is so low. It's because his administration cannot help but vomit American exceptionalism to the people, to the masses, and then have nothing to show for it. The U.S. capitalist economy is not in good shape. People are struggling. If people are saying they're struggling, you should believe them. Although Americans are no stranger to being lied to, this is one of those things, right? This is materialism. This is dialectical materialism at its best. Being determines consciousness. When people are struggling economically and they're thinking that, you better believe, and you best believe that there is a connection between those things. And then you add in the Ukraine crisis onto this, because the Joe Biden administration, the way that it's handled the Ukraine crisis, has had a direct impact on people's, it has had a direct impact on people's livelihoods. This is what we're talking about here. We're talking about how Joe Biden has leveled sanctions onto Russia, has sent billions upon billions of dollars to Ukraine and weapons and other kinds of aid. And now they're talking about sending $40 billion. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. They're going to send $40 billion in aid to Ukraine, while all of these struggles that the people of the United States are going through just keep getting worse. So that's why the approval rating of Joe Biden is going down, and it keeps going down. And this crisis in Ukraine, this gasoline being poured onto the fire, is making things worse. And this is how you know that someone like Joe Biden is controlled by the military-industrial complex, because the only way that the United States gets out of this situation, the only way Joe Biden recovers any kind of legitimacy, is by playing the adult in the room, trying to broker some kind of, at least of a ceasefire or a stalemate or something, and then enacting policy that shows that the United States is not just still a big ticket on the world stage, but also can address its domestic concerns. That's the only way Joe Biden gets out of this, even from the standpoint of just realpolitik, bourgeois politics. That's the only way you can recover approval here from the American public, from even Democrats, right? This isn't even to say that the real solution to all of this is the US and NATO out of the region, and that we really need a socialist governance system in the United States to address people's needs. That, of course, is what I think we need, and what I think a lot of working people would benefit from, what working people would really benefit from. But we're just talking about realpolitik, bourgeois politics. The only way that the Joe Biden administration gets out of this is by changing course and doing so in a way that shows that the United States is the adult in the room. But the United States can't do that. Right now, you have, instead of Joe Biden addressing these concerns that people have about the economy, about inflation, you have Joe Biden now traveling throughout Asia to try to mobilize Asian countries against China. A completely suicidal mission, one that doesn't have any prospect for victory. China's out here talking about expanding BRICS, right? It's talking about continuing with the Belt and Road Initiative. It is going to continue to talk about strengthening international partnerships. That's happening. And that's not going to change. And countries, even adversarial countries that tend to be in the US's orbit, like Japan and South Korea, they'd be absolutely foolish to join on with the United States and say, yeah, we're going to isolate China primarily and principally. They would cut themselves off from an economic lifeline that they cannot afford to do. And so the United States pursuing this containment policy with its so-called Asian allies is just counterproductive, and it's just fueling more war. Now you even have the pages of the corporate media talking about Taiwan, right? Taiwan would be a nuclear conflict. They're talking openly about this. And so, I mean, this is the situation that we're in. We're in a state of endless war that Joe Biden is completely abiding by. And it is playing a huge role in why his approval is going down. And I think we should feel pretty good about that in some respects, because it means that people are sick and tired of this status quo that we're in. But it also means that there's a whole lot of unorganized discontent out there. There's a lot of dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction is not necessarily a recipe for change. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are just going to rise up and everything will get better. It could mean that people could be misdirected into reactionary political movements. I mean, how many people have we seen, right, go down into the Trump camp, which is just another reactionary political phenomenon? It has no progressivism in it. It's not, for as much as we should be saying to people, convincing people that actually you need an anti-war position that is progressive, that means that we're talking about peace and that we're not just talking about our narrow self-interest. You have many more who are kind of being captured into two-party politics, and the pendulum just swings from one side to the next. So anti-democratic party sentiment goes into the Republican Party and vice versa, depending on which is in power. And I want to make one really critical point before we close and get into some question and answers, okay? So the United States, there's a tendency, okay? There's a tendency in the United States that depending on which political party has majority power, the other party will take a flank, right? So we saw this during the Obama period, and even during, and especially during the Trump period. The Democrats, right, did not have a lot of capacity, right, in Congress for a big chunk of that period. I think 2012 was the period where the Democrats just lost their majorities and didn't really recover them until I think halfway through the Trump administration. So when we look at that period, we see the Democrats flanking a lot to the left because it was easy, right? It was easy to do that. It was easy to flank to the left and say you're for things. You even had Kamala Harris, I'm for Medicare for all, right? And it's because they know that they'll never get the votes to actually enact it. And then when they can get the votes, right? Let's say over the last several years, there have been a Democratic Party majority in Congress where you ostensibly could get the votes. Well, what happens then? The Democratic Party suddenly isn't for Medicare for all anymore. It's, oh, well, Medicare for all who want it. Well, Medicare for all maybe later. Oh, expand Medicare. All of the kind of ways, oh, public option maybe, or let's just wait and then we don't get anything. The Republican Party has done the same thing in many respects. Now, I don't think it's about concrete domestic policy, but especially around foreign policy, we've seen Republicans, when there is either a stalemate in Congress or a slight minority for the Republicans, they will come out, and a few of them, or a handful or a dozen sometimes, will come out and take stronger stances against interventionism. And we're seeing that pretty hot and heavy with Ukraine. And so now there's all this debate I see about, like, okay, well, Republicans are the anti-war party now or not. And I think we need to not look at things so literally, because what I think is really at play is partisan politics and a lot of flanking going on politically in order to gain strength for the next election cycle. And a lot of it is being done when there's no possibility for accountability within the existing structure. Now, I think the test, right, the only test that is worth taking when it comes to establishment politics is how much can people themselves, ordinary people, working people, oppressed people themselves, force the issue to the point where these politicians can't manipulate and outflank each other for political gain, that they have to take a firm stance or not and deal with the consequences of whatever decision they take. That, I think, is the only true eye test when it comes to bourgeois politics, because all these motherfuckers, they're all lying. They all lie to us. They don't care about peace. They don't care about the fact that people have are suffering, are going hungry, are making wages not fit for human life, not fit to even reproduce a human life. I mean, that is not a concern. It's all about the elections. It's all about the elections. How do you get elected? And so, in my opinion, when we're in this situation, crisis of legitimacy, Joe Biden's polling numbers going down, Republicans outflanking like Marjorie Taylor Greene, that, I mean, she is like a sociopathic, anti-China, like ultra right conservative. She is now coming out against Ukraine, that Ukraine funding bill, $40 billion. And people are saying, oh, well, look at that. And we should look at that. And we should leverage that. I'm not saying we shouldn't leverage it. We should deny it. We should just say, oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's a sociopath Republican. She doesn't mean it, and then leave it. No, we should leverage that for our advantage and say, why aren't Democrats coming out on the side of peace? And why is it that there's absolutely no accountability behind this, right? The same happened with Donald Trump. I was all about taking advantage of Donald Trump's anti-interventionist rhetoric for the good of the anti-war movement. But at the same time, not many people were doing that. There wasn't a lot of seizing that. A lot of the left was just on this like, oh my God, Trump is so evil, can't pay attention to anything he says. Well, of course, a lot of people on the right, almost all people on the right, but once you get to the thick of it, to political action, to actually having to do something, then they don't want to be associated with the communists or the Reds or whatever it may be. And so what you have is a stasis, a stalemate, stagnation, and you don't get any opportunity to try to, oh, well, maybe let's do something about the fact that we do need détente with Russia. We do need better relations with the DPRK. We need to ease that situation there because there has been a historic injustice in that region committed by the United States, an ongoing war against Korea. Oh, yeah, maybe we should try to take advantage of the Trump administration's overtures. Didn't really happen. So, anyway, the point is that we are in a political crisis. And Joe Biden is in a crisis in of itself. The Democrats are in a crisis. The polling numbers show it. They are in big trouble in the midterm elections. I've been saying that I feel like they're going to get swept out. They're going to lose that small majority that they have in Congress. And that's going to lead into what I think is going to be an ultra reactionary period for the Biden administration, the so-called, last 18 months or whatever it may be of his first term are going to be, we better buckle up because they're going to be absolutely and utterly scary in a lot of ways. I think policy-wise, I think we're going to see massive escalations militarily wherever the hell they think they can. This could include Latin America, could include Africa. We already see Biden invading Somalia. It's definitely going to include China. We already see how they're gearing up to mobilize the Asian partners, so to speak. It's going to, of course, include Russia. We already know that Finland and Sweden are gearing up to, or trying to become NATO members, and Turkey's kind of getting in the way. But nonetheless, the trend is war, endless war, and the Joe Biden administration is going to have, I think, just ample room. Should they get swept out, there's going to be ample room for this, oh, well, the Republicans made me do it mantra, and we can expect domestic and foreign policy to get even more reactionary. It happened under Obama. I don't know if you remember. Obama's first term was utterly disastrous too. But his second term was full of examples. There were some of course, the legacy moments, right? The Cuba and the Iran stuff that happened, the deals and the easing relations. But there was also this escalation, massive escalation of the new Cold War against Russia, against China, massive escalation of the war on Syria, Ukraine coup. All of that happened during Obama's second term. And so we should expect under Biden's second half of his first term, which may be it for him, if things continue to go their way they're going, we should expect that extreme reaction to be prevalent, especially given the fact that his administration is in big trouble. So they're also going to be seeking flashpoints for how to mobilize the electorate to support Joe Biden, especially if there is a massive loss in the midterm elections. So there's a lot of political forces at play here, but I think the real point of all of this is that there's a political crisis afoot, and Joe Biden has absolutely no answer for it. None, no answer. The Biden administration, the Democrats, they have no answer. Let them eat cake is really the answer. Go ahead. If your babies can't get baby formula, if you can't pay for food, if you can't pay for your housing, well, you're on your own. And the United States is heading into another economic crisis. It feels like that for a lot of people because it is like that, because the United States has never rectified the economic crisis of 2007, 2008, and then the massive economic crisis as well just in the past few years. It never rectified the contradictions that created those crises. This massive financialization, this massive gobble up of wealth. Every time there's a massive upward transfer of wealth, the contradictions of capitalism only become more acute. They don't become less acute. They don't become less acute just because the business cycle stabilizes a bit. Actually, they could continue to sharpen this inequality, this poverty, this suffering that people are going through, even just here in the US. But this is not even to take into account the rest of the world, which is facing, right, just so much damage from the way that the pandemic and global politics have shaped out. I mean, this is a moment. I think this is a moment for us to really understand what it means to be in a crisis and to be in what will be, I think, a huge history making moment. This is a moment of history that will be written about as, I think, the precursor to an explosion. It's like a pressure cooker. That's what U.S. politics, that's what the U.S. political economy of capitalism and imperialism, that's what it feels like. It feels like there's a pressure cooker underneath, that there's just all these contradictions mounting up, and they're just set to explode. And I think the Ukraine crisis was just like one of those explosions, and we're going to continue to get explosion after explosion and bigger economically, politically, militarily. And we have to be prepared for them, prepared to survive them, and then prepare to organize our forces, revolutionary, radical, progressive, leftist. We need to be prepared to organize all the forces we can to resist the onslaught that will come out of it. So that's all I have for the stories, right? There wasn't that much today, but I want to do question and answer with all of you. So let's do that for about 10, 15 minutes. Keep liking the stream. Stick around. Don't leave just because the stories are done. Be sure to like the stream. Continue to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Hit that notifications bell. And I'm 5 subscribers away on Patreon from meeting my monthly goal. There's still about 9 or so days left in May. So if you're able to support my work on Patreon, that's the best way to sustain my journalism. Patreon.com/Dhaiphong. It is greatly appreciated. And I'm getting very close to my overall goal. I'm about $140 per month away. So please do support me if you can. But nonetheless, let's do some questions. If you have, I don't see any super chats today. But if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. So, thoughts on American socialism. So, if you want to put in the chat a little bit more of an elaboration what you mean by that, that would be great. So, my opinion on like an American socialism is, well, I think that socialism in the United States will take on its own characteristics. Whether I call those American or not, I'm not sure, because, right, I think that this term American is a loaded political term. It means so many things to so many people, and I don't think it can serve as the basis of unity, right? We can't use it as a basis of unity. Some people argue that, okay, you can use patriotism as a basis of unity in the United States. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure that the levels of distrust we are seeing in the government and in society are indicative of any kind of, well, we can, we can make things better by appealing to people's Americanism. I'm more on the Malcolm X side politically as a socialist. I think Americanism is very dangerous. I think if we start to unite people around Americanism, we're going to have to deal with contradictions that maybe we don't need to deal with in a socialist movement. In a socialist, maybe we can actually marginalize those contradictions because they actually get in the way of our vision for what a new society will look like. For example, what does Americanism mean to people in the positive sense? Does it just mean family and church and God? And none of those things really speak to our material reality. They don't speak to the material needs of people. Maybe the church does as an institute. We'll have to definitely work with churches and at least those who will work with socialists, because not all churches will work with socialists, very few actually. But those who will, we need to work with them, of course, to build the service part of a socialist movement. But does it mean that we need to adopt the politics of religion? Not necessarily. So we need to be a little more sophisticated. So that's my take on American socialism, is that Americanism, unlike Chinese socialism, unlike Cuban socialism, the American part of that is not progressive. Okay. I firmly, if we've read Gerald Horne's book on the counter-revolution of 1776, I'm very convinced by it. I do think that there's a huge element in the so-called bourgeois revolution of the United States that formed the United States that was about preserving a very reactionary institution of slavery, one that was actually becoming outmoded in capitalist development. And so therefore, there's not much about Americanism that brings forth any kind of revolutionary, nationalistic aims, goals, and opportunities. Unlike Chinese socialism, where China was a huge civilization for so long and had been ravaged by foreign imperialism, by Western imperialism. Same thing with Cuba. Such a long history of a fight for independence from imperialism, right? It's a different social relationship. And so I would love to hear an argument against that, because I think the relationship of capital, the relationship of imperialism to the United States versus to countries that have had revolutionary projects with nationalism at their core, with patriotism at their core. I would like to hear the distinctions between those things be actually addressed. And so that's my take on American socialism. So what are your takes on Matt Stroller's take on China? So I was actually on Brianna Joy Gray's debrief, and Brian, you're on Facebook, so if you could just go ahead over to the Left Lens YouTube channel, like the stream, that would be great. Even if you want to stick around on Facebook. But in terms of Matt Stoller, I was actually on the debrief with Brianna Joy Gray, and I didn't know I was going to be debating with Matt Stoller. I don't think she did either. I think he was just there in the CALLIN app, and he was brought up, and then we had a debate. I mean, my take on Matt Stoller's take on China is that it's absolutely ridiculous. It is insulting. It is reactionary. It is on the far right. He believes that China is some kind of Nazi government. He believes China is undermining the United States. He believes all of the propaganda about China he believes, and he takes it even further than even what people in the national security establishment would say, where he goes to this kind of Nazi trope, this idea that China is kind of the worst of the worst that's ever been, and completely negates the real and true history of China, what's actually happening, the achievements that China has been able to accomplish, and what its history is, right? To call China fought against fascism, lost more than 15 million people in the fight against Japanese fascism, was a huge player in freeing the world from the scourge of fascism. And it's insulting to then call China a so-called fascist country when literally those millions of people who sacrificed both for the fight against fascism and then for the revolution, which would occur not too long afterward, 1949. You're insulting people who have built something that I think really deserves to be paid attention to in a real way, which is a revolutionary project that has improved the lives of the people, that if you cut through the anti-communist dogma, that if you actually talk to real, actual Chinese people, not just the ones who parrot propaganda for corporate media outlets, but if you actually study the situation, you actually go there, you actually talk to people who are currently a part of building China, socialism with Chinese characteristics, you see all of the great things that they've been able to accomplish and all of the challenges that they still have, right? With income inequality, with the environment, etc. These things aren't a secret. There's still challenges in China. But then again, you have to acknowledge the poverty alleviation, the massive development of infrastructure, the standard of living that's risen. And then people say, oh, you can't look at standard of living because even capitalism raises people's standard of living. When? When? When has capitalism been the reason for a raise in standard of living? Oh, you want to talk about World War II? Well, actually, it was socialism that raised the standard of living because it was the fear of socialism which forced capitalist governments to institute any kind of welfare state. And guess what those capitalist governments did? They eviscerated them. While in China, the direction is different. The trajectory looks like a line that's going north, that's going towards ending poverty, raising incomes, ensuring people have what they need, and then ensuring people have more than what they need, that they have access to the high technology, that they have access to being able to build up a society that is about more than want, more than poverty, and that should be admired. And so my take on Matt Stoller's take on China is that we shouldn't be listening to him. I mean, honestly, I don't know what he really knows much about. He's some kind of monopoly czar. I don't really see it. I don't understand that. Whatever, though. He comes from more of a mainstream background anyway. He has some kind of libertarian think tank going on somewhere. So he does what he does, and he plays an insidious role. And I don't think we should be. I don't think he's on the left. So I don't understand the attention he gets from the left. It's very curious to me, but that's my opinion. So let's look. Here we go. You can tell. Would you agree that AOC is not the ideological heavyweight of the squad? Most others' criticism to focus on obvious celebrity of 1 out of 6 or 7. Yeah, I would agree to some degree. I think that her celebrity, though, is cultivated by those who have invested a lot in her. So I think she does have a lot more social capital, right? Political capital than the others in so many ways. And I think that has played a role in her celebrity. Um, you know, so I wouldn't call her the ideological heavyweight of the squad, but she is a pretty good barometer of who the squad represents. Now, of course, right, Elon Omar, Rashida Tlaib, they've commented on things at times, especially in regards to imperialism, to the left of AOC. That's 100% true. But at the same time, their actions have not been that different, right? So they all kind of go along the same way in terms of their actions. They don't take a firm stance on a lot of very important questions to people on the left like myself. And then they end up with this egregious universal consensus on Ukraine and Russia, which I think shows the ultimate limitations of the squad as a political phenomenon, that it is not really adversarial to the Democratic Party, as some people may think, and that their agreement to this extremely damaging $40 billion bill, which is, I would say it's more than pouring gasoline onto a fire. I would say this $40 billion Ukraine military aid bill is basically a step toward a global confrontation because it is making war permanent. It is making this conflict permanent. And as I said earlier in the stream, the U.S. needs to be the adult in the room, but it's not. The only way Joe Biden is going to recover his legitimacy and approval is by being an adult in the room. And this is the opposite of that. This is picking up these old toys that you spent trillions making, shipping them to Ukraine and saying, have at it. Continue as a proxy for us in this war that we have brewing with Russia. And thank you so much for feeding the military-industrial complex. That to me is what the squad is representing here when they vote like they did. Okay, so I'm looking for, thank you so much for the super chat, Alexander. Really appreciate it. So, looking for the questions. I sincerely want to hear scathing criticism of China, but it always bullshit smears. Where are the real Marxist criticisms? Says Joe the Earth Water. Well, here's my opinion on that. I understand. Look, there are criticisms to be had, and I think that the Communist Party of China has their criticisms of China's development path. I think that there is a lot of variation within the Communist Party of China over which direction that the party should go in. But because it's a communist party and it adheres to democratic centralism, it adheres to what can be agreed upon in at least a majority for the party, then that's the path that's taken. And so for me, I think that China, right, that if it depends on what we mean by criticism, because China certainly has problems that it needs to deal with, and that I think it is dealing with. And so for me, it's far to say that China needs to be doing better at it, right? China is addressing the pollution problem. China is addressing its corruption problem. China is addressing its income inequality problem with this new common prosperity move, right? It is doing those things. And the Communist Party is at the center of all that. So for me, it's not really about, okay, is China perfect or is it imperfect? It's about how is China relating to and handling the contradictions of any kind of socialist project? Because all socialist projects have it. We don't have this same kind of, I feel like we don't have the same kind of orientation toward, let's say, Cuba, right? There's a lot more friendliness toward Cuba, especially on the left in the United States. And oftentimes Cuba is painted as this perfect place, but Cuba isn't perfect. Cuba is very poor. Cuba struggles with sanctions, and it's not just the sanctions that harm Cuba, right? There has been this and we have to observe this dialectically. There has been, right, a difficult time. When I was there was talk about how do you get young people to adhere to the revolution and to carry on and pick up its mantle. These are challenges that socialists have to face, right? If you're not directly involved in a revolution, how do you get that to continue when economically the prospects for life getting better are not necessarily abundant? How do you continue a revolution in that way? How do you make it attractive, especially when you have, after the fall of the Soviet Union, this massive wave of neoliberal thinking and thought and politics and economics spreading across the earth, infecting people's minds? How do you do that, especially in Cuba, where there's such a high level of intellectual development and human development, that you can't have a situation where people learn about neoliberal politics? We know that the NED is in there trying to use hip hop and other things to move young people away from socialism. How do you deal with that? That's not all just a matter of outside interference. It's the fact that there are internal conditions that are spurring the possibility that there may be maybe not a rejection of the revolution as a whole, but the seeds planted toward getting there in subsequent generations. And so socialist projects cannot be perfect because the overall situation is very difficult. We don't live in a world socialist movement where we're figuring out all together collectively how to now build the communist ideal, how to now get to the classless part of the socialist revolution. We're not there yet, right? Most of the world is capitalist. Most of the world is being ravaged by imperialism in some way. And all socialist countries are under heavy attack from imperialism, and that includes China. So for me, it really depends politically on how we go about this kind of criticism that we want, right? And why is it that we want and need criticism? Some of it feels like, and I felt like this on the debrief, Brianna Joy Gray, sometimes it feels like we want to just be affirmed that of course things aren't perfect, because we feel like the only conversation that's being had is, well, China's all positive or China's all negative. And I think that politically we have to think about this in a sophisticated strategic way, where we're looking at, well, what is the best way of countering US imperial propaganda towards China? What is the best way to adhere to a Marxist position, a position that is true to Marxism around China? And I think that is studying and learning what the Communist Party of China is doing, this party of 90 plus million people that regularly publishes documents, that regularly updates both its history, its understanding of history, its understanding of the current situation and policy. studying those things so we can understand better how it works, and we can understand it better so that we can take an independent position on it. I think that would be a great start. And I was thinking about doing a video eventually arguing that the Communist Party generally has been the most progressive force in human history. And now that mantle about which Communist Party particularly is in that category, and I would say it's China's Communist Party, is in the vanguard. It is the most progressive force in humanity right now. And we need to acknowledge that. I don't see why that's strange to acknowledge, given how China performed with the pandemic, given how China has eradicated extreme poverty, given how China is leading the way in all of this life-saving and planet-saving technology. I don't see why we can't acknowledge that. Maybe, and I think that's the real question for me. So thank you so much for that question, Joe. And I appreciate you always being on here, really. Salute to you. I really do. I always see you in the chat. So thank you so much. When will the government stop sending aid to Israel and start supporting Palestine politically? Never. Absolutely never. Never will you see the U.S. government support Palestine. I mean, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. So the real question, I think, for me is, not will the U.S. government support Palestine, but what will progressive anti-war, anti-imperialist forces do to ensure that the U.S. government cannot commit war crimes, right? And the old Leninist conception of fighting your own government for the betterment of the peoples of the world. That's what we need to be focusing on, I think. I think it's putting pressure, such intense pressure on the United States that they can't continue propping up and supporting that not neo-colonialist, that settler colonialist Zionist regime. But never will we see the U.S. government, as it's currently constituted, support Palestine. And that's because the United States is really the father to an entity like Israel. It is the standard bearer of what a settler colonial society is. And so it will never relinquish that status, right? Especially as an imperialist hegemon in the current stage that it's in. Israel is just too useful geopolitically, too useful, too strategically important, right? Too much of a good thing for the United States to continue its onslaught on the Arab and Muslim world and to expand its hegemony in that part of the world. Doesn't even matter how bad of a partner Israel is, because we know that there are many instances where Israel has kind of double-crossed the United States, but it doesn't matter because it's all about what is overall best for the empire, and Israel's existence has been deemed absolutely critical. So really the onus is on us. So I don't see many other questions here. So someone asked, but what can we call America? I think we'll be calling it something different after the revolution. I don't think we'll be calling it the United States of America. But at the same time, I don't know if that's a question that really needs to be answered right now. I think the politics really need to be addressed first. So there's a lot of work to do. But anyway, I'm putting on my headphones soon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I may stay on the stream. I actually got to check on my dog. I wanted to, so I'm going to take a little bit, like a couple minute break. Stick around. I wanted to go on to CALLIN after this. Okay. So follow me on CALLIN, guys. I'm thinking about going on CALLIN maybe in the next 20 minutes to do an episode there where you guys can call in. It's in the description, but I'm going to actually send it here as well in the chat. So there it is. There's CALLIN. There's my podcast there. And yeah, please do follow me there. Make sure I'm probably going to go on at like 2 p.m. Eastern after I check on my dog and whatnot. He's been out of the room for quite a while, and I hear him. I hear his thing, like his collar. So anyway, keep liking the stream. I think there was one more question that I missed though, but follow that because I'm going to be going on, I think. in 20 minutes, so we can have call in. So you can call in and take any questions that you have, or just converse, right? So there was another question here, though. Okay, is the U.S. military industrial complex trying to bait China into military action in support of Russia in order to divide Chinese forces, creating an opening for U.S. militarism around Taiwan? So that's a good question. I mean, I don't think that there's bait. I think that U.S. strategists aren't stupid. I think they know that China is not going to take the bait and support Russia militarily. I think that that was never really a question. Would China support Russia militarily? I don't think that was ever a question, because first of all, China and Ukraine have extremely close ties, just not as close. I mean, Russia and China's strategic partnership is, I would say, more important in the final analysis. But Ukraine is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a pretty important country to China. It would not do anything but stay neutral in this situation, and that's just part of its policy of non-interference. And I think U.S. strategists know this. But I think the question of Taiwan is very important, because I think the United States, these same strategists, right, Rand Corporation and whatnot, I think they do, though, want to use this Ukraine scenario as possible practice for what would happen with Taiwan. And we see the conversations all over the Western media. Mike Pompeo was there right after the intervention happened in late February, right? He went to Taiwan and started talking all this nonsense about independence. So there is, right, it's a different situation because Taiwan is part of China, and there's a whole step before you can really get to a Ukraine type situation. Taiwan's not an independent country. I don't think ever will be. Most people in Taiwan don't want it. But the overall militarization of that region and trying to provoke China into a conflict, that's all very real, and I think related to the Ukraine crisis. So there is, I think, definitely some of that going on. There definitely is some testing ground here about what could possibly happen. So Alex said I missed his question. Sorry about that. When am I next meeting up with Margaret? Soon. Hopefully either end of this month or early next month. My next thing that I'm going to be doing, so I'm probably not going to be on until next week, Wednesday, but I'll be on with Michael Hudson, the economist. So that should be really fun. Be on the lookout for that, okay? Because I'll be on with Michael Hudson. So, but Margaret and I will be back on together very soon, probably early next month. I wanted to do so earlier, but then I got sick. What do you think of this embrace of anti-war right by the left? Well, I would say that it's complicated. I would say that, I don't think that there's anyone on the right that's truly anti-war. At the same time, I do think that there is something to be said about what we can do to just highlight the fact that there are so-called Republicans and right-wingers, quote unquote, who are willing to speak out for peace. But we have to be strategic, and we have to be, I think, sober in our analysis and understand what is the greater political moment that is causing this rift, that is causing, right? Democrats used to oppose intervention. Now Republicans are supposedly saying they oppose intervention. What's causing these swings politically? And then how do we take an independent stance, taking advantage of this moment, but at the same time remaining independent in our politics, showing that there is actually an even more correct stance to have that we need to convince people toward, and that is for peace and for internationalism, for real lasting peace. So I think that's all for the questions. All right. So I'm going to go on to CALLIN very soon. Okay. So see me in about 15 minutes on CALLIN. I'm going to start setting it up now. Actually, I'm going to set up the room now while I'm on with all of you, and then send that over. Okay. Send that over in the chat, because I would like to hear from you. And while you're here, though, continue to like the stream, continue to subscribe to the channel, continue to hit that notifications bell so you know, uh, uh, when I'm coming on. And then make sure, right, if you're able to, I am about 5 subscribers away on Patreon at patreon.com/Dhaiphong. And so I am going to just make this room really quick. So 5 subscribers away. That's my goal on Patreon for this month. I'm close to it, but you can help out by going to the link in the description, supporting my work. It's how you help sustain my journalism. So stick around so I can send this in the link, because I'd love for you to start following me on CALLIN too, so we can have more of this engagement where, you know, I hear you and we can go back and forth and kind of converse. It mixes it up a bit, and I think that's one of the great things about CALLIN. So here we go. Okay, so somebody said disappointed I don't show how much I make on Patreon. Most people who aren't insanely big show it. So that's actually an error on my part. I did that when I was doing this housing application, and I honestly didn't want them to see this. I didn't think it was their business, and I just haven't changed it back, but I will. I'll change it back. I can tell you, I think I make something like 2863 or something, 2863. So Klimbatiz. Yeah, I'm not insanely big. 3,000 a month is my goal, so I think 3,000 a month would be like a sustainable income for me to have, where I can focus on this actually full time, because I'm still working part time to make up the gaps. So 3,000 a month would be that. And so I'll definitely be honest about that. I live in a very expensive city, so 2063, what does that add up to? It's less than 36 a year. So yeah, that's what I make. So and so how does CALLIN work? So CALLIN works by, you have to download the app. Okay. Oh geez. Download the app CALLIN, the CALLIN app. I'm gonna send the it says tomorrow. Jesus. All right, hold on one second. I gotta edit this room. There we go. So this will start at 2 p.m. Okay. Maybe a little later, but I'm gonna set it for 2 p.m. Okay, guys? So just bear with me. So I'm saving it, and then I'm gonna send you the link for the upcoming room. So all you gotta do is download the app on your phone, Android. Let's see. How does CALLIN work? Yeah. So you can get this on Android or Apple devices. Okay. So Q&A. I'm just gonna put this in the chat as well. So I understand. So Klimbatiz, you said that you make minimum wage. Yeah, I understand that. Look, I don't expect anyone to give to me, especially if you're feeling like you're unable to because of life. I never expect that, for sure. I feel like I live in the most expensive place on earth. I feel like most cities at this point are the most expensive places on earth. So yeah, it's your choice for sure. If you want to give more like one-time stuff as it comes around, there's a lot of links in the description as well. But I wouldn't say I'm making premium money. So one interesting thing about Patreon is that it's self-employment, so it's untaxed. So like, with a grain of salt, even if I were to make 3,000 a month, which is my goal, I have to pay back that in taxes. So it's not really 36, it's not real, you know what I'm saying? Like, just like most people who are living like 36,000, you would expect people to be struggling on that for the most part, not just because of taxes, but because of just how expensive things are. But nonetheless, I totally get your point. And yeah, whatever you feel like you can do. And thank you, KP Gen, for the message. It would mean a lot of people get his anti-imperialist messages. That would be great. Incredible amount. I don't know what that is, but did I send you the CALLIN link yet? Yeah, there it is. So make sure you're there. CALLIN, so Gubarala, CALLIN does work on a PC, but you won't be able to call in. So if you want to chat with me, in a few minutes, be sure to get in on your phone. Okay. If you just want to listen, that's fine. That's fine. I do hope that some of you all will come subscribe to my podcast and participate today, because that makes it a little more lively. And I would like to hear your thoughts more I know this chat is not really the thing. So nonetheless, guys, I'm going to go. I'm going to take a little bit of a break, but you got the call link. I'll send it again. It's also in the description, my podcast. You can just find the upcoming room. I'll be there in about 10 minutes, maybe 20, if, whatever happens. So, yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for coming today. And Wednesday, what time? I'm in Eastern time zone, by the way, 2 p.m. Eastern time. That's when I hope to be on. Wednesday, in the afternoon, I think 1:30 p.m. I'll be on with Michael Hudson, the economist. He's great, a great voice on the left. And so be on the lookout. I'll probably be preparing, and I'm going out of town Monday and Tuesday, so I'll be preparing stuff for that Sunday. So be sure you look out on the page, hit that notifications bell so you know when it's happening. And yeah, all right, guys, take care. Thanks for coming to this stream today. I know it was a little quicker. Appreciate all the questions. They were great. Like the stream before you leave, subscribe to the channel before you leave, and check out my patreon.com/Dhaiphong. Check me out there. Support my work if you can before you leave. So take good care, everyone, and I'll be with you again soon.